Okay. Hi, everybody. Can you hear? Can you not hear me? No. Okay. 1 second. How about now? Are we good now? All right. Cool. All right. I think I finally got a hang of the software just in time for it to be discontinued. All right. So tonight is going to be kind of a 2-for-1. So last week, so this past Tuesday, I didn't get to do class. So yay, live Friday class. What we're going to do first is we're going to do our basic warm-ups and our basic warm-up cuts and thrust series, and then we're going to dive into a quick little slideshow on Mensur, or the weight of the fight. And it's just kind of going over some very basic vocabulary that describes different parts of fencing. All right. So let's go ahead and put our sword-like, or in this case, Mensur-like object aside, and let's do our warm-ups. All right. All right, let's begin. And 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. 2, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. And 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. 2, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. And 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. 2, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. 2, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. 2, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. 2, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Almost lost my headset there. And 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. 2, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. 2, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. 2, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. 2, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. All the way down. And 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. 2, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Do those knees. And 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. 2, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. 2, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. All right, grab your Mensur or longsword-like object. All right, so I'm going to be standing in the High Lugensland, or the Hoikvamtag. All right, I'm going to cut Oberhau to the Einhorn height. Okay? Und eins. zwei, drei, vier, fünf, sechs, sieben, acht, neun, 10. Sehr gut. Now we're going to cut to longest Wort. Und 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. All right, all the way down to Bastei or Alber. Und 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. All right. Keep that right foot forward. Let's go to Lugensland oder Hoik Wamtag und wir hauen rechtes Oberhau. Und 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Okay, switch your feet. Left foot forward. Hoik Lugensand or shoulder Lugensand or shoulder Vomtag, whichever you prefer. Und 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Okay, we're going to do linken Oberhau, rechtes Unter. Okay, und 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Switch your feet. Right foot forward, left foot back. From the high Lugensland, or Vamtag, we're going right Oberhau, left Unter. Und 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. All right, Mittelhau. Into the Mittelhut. Sword or Messer on your left side. Und 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Switch sides. Beginning on the right, moving to left. 6, 7, 8, 9, sehen. Okay, hold on 1 second. Okay, alright, cool. Let's do our cuts from Stier. Okay, so into the right Stier, oder Achs, and we are going to cut Oberhau. Und 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Into Neben on the right. Oberhau. Und 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Sehr gut. Okay. Stier oder Ochs on left. And we're going to cut Oberhau. Und 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. All right, into Neben on the left. Let's do that Oberhau. Und 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Okay, let's do some thrusting practice, all right? So let's go into Eber oder Flug on the right rechten Seite. We will thrust into Stier oder Ochs on linken Seite. Okay? Und 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Okay, so from Eber on the right hand side into Stier on die rechten Seiten. Okay, und 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Sehr gut. Okay, in Eber auf dem linken Seiten und so Stier oder Ochs mit dem rechten Seiten. Und 1, 2, drei, vier, fünf, sechs, sieben, acht, neun, 10. Sehr gut, okay. Auf Eber auf dem linken Seite, so Ochs oder Stier an linken Seiten. Und 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Sehr gut. Okay, auf dem Longsword. So we're going to go from the long point. We're going to thrust forward. You can have either left or right, or your right foot forward. All that matters is 30% in, 70% back. Und 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Okay, so good. Now let's do a few extra because we still have a couple minutes. So I guess trying to think, what's the best way to translate this? So if you have a long sword, why don't you go into Schrankut on the left-hand side, and you will do a crump, and then a strike to the skull. Okay. If you have a Mensur, it's going to be single hand, out and up. Two-handed, it's from so in most cases we're in the Schrankut on the left, and you're going to crump to the right, so you are now opens hand, and then into the skull. Okay? Und 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. Good. Let's do it from the other side. So, folks with a long sword, that's simply going to be doing a Krampau from the Schrankut, and then doing a Schnappen to the skull. Folks with the Mensur, it's a little more complicated. So you basically want to begin in right Aber, coming down, and then same thing, but when you do the Schnappen, you need to step back with your left foot. Right? So again, with the Mensur, 1, 2. Right? And 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. All right, let's see, what other fun things can we do? All right, so if you have a long sword, you're going to do Shielhau. All right, and what I want you to do is start in right flug, and I want you to do. I'm sorry. In the shoulder Vomtog, and I want you to cut out and step in with the Shielhau. If you have a Messer, I want you to begin in the kind of Nebenhut on the left side, and if someone could pop into the Discord real quick. So I think Leanne's looking for the link. I know she's a bit late, but I'll pop it in a second, actually. I'm sorry. So Nebenhut on the left, and simply you're going to cut up into the inverted hand and around, okay? So from here, if you have a Messer, you're going to go from here to here, all right? If you have Longsword, I just want you to cut a Shielhau and stab. Let's do 5 of these, and then it'll just be about time. Und, eins, zwei, drei, vier, fünf. All right, everyone. So give me 1 second. I'm going to switch. So shake it out. Do some stretches. Give me about 1 minute. I'm going to switch over to. The presentation mode. Okay. So give me 1 second. Now's a good time to get a snack and some water. All right. Can everyone see the deck okay? Cool. All right. So this isn't going to be... so this is my... let's wait till... I think we can get Leanne in here. I feel bad. Copy message link. Okay. Starting a new unit, so good to jump in. Okay, so what we're gonna do is we're gonna talk about Mensur. Now that can mean a lot of different things. To some folks, that means a certain type of fencing. But yeah, so here we go. Let's talk about the weight of the fight. So Mensur involves a few different elements. It involves Motus, which is movement, Abstand und Raum, which is distance and space, Zeit, which is time, and a question that I did not have time to translate into German, which is when to attack. So let's talk about the first part, which is Motus. Modus, oh, yay. Okay. All right, we'll back up just one slide. Hello, sorry about that, Leanne. All right, so, perfect timing. We just basically went over this the first slide, which is just kind of an overview of everything we're going to be talking about. Again, Motus, Abstand und Raum, Zeit, und when to attack. I will find a good word for that in German at some point. I'm sure the Germans have one word. So modus is basically, they're kind of like 2 ways to look at movement. Movement in relationship, your own personal movements, and then movements relative to your opponent's movements. And in regards to your own movements, I think we're talking about moving forward with the Zufechten. There's a couple different, and I'll preface this with the idea that there are a couple different ideas of what Zufechten mean. Zufechten can technically means like towards the fight or into the fight. There are some interpretations of Zufechten that also mean you're kind of like crossing of the threshold into the actual fighting area. Otherwise, you're just not in the fight. It's kind of like I think that's like an important thing to say. Like when there's defecting, it means you're moving towards or into the realm of danger. Um, Otherwise, it also involved in like motus is the idea of the Abzug, which is the withdrawal or moving backwards. Usually I should say backwards and such that it usually means you're moving backwards. It can mean to move backwards, but Abzug definitely more or less means to you're kind of dialing down the pressure on the fight with your distance, right? You're moving you and your opponent. The distance is increasing. Whether that means you run past your opponent screaming to run away, you are technically still abzuging, maybe not in the safest way, but it is still an abzug. And then within kind of all that, you can either move like straight or oblique. And then also its movements relative to your opponent, like where are they moving and more importantly, where is their weapon going, and how those things are kind of related. And these all kind of start diving into like a very particular kind of lesson for fencing, which is easier kind of to go over and go through in person. But like everything in fencing, it was like the way it was best explained to me ever was like all of fencing can be kind of compressed down to the idea of the question of, do I move left? Do I move right? Do I go high or do I go low? And in those four things, do I move in or out, right? And this kind of movement, and so all these questions of movement are all kind of associated with, like right, left, high, low, forwards, and back. It's that whole kind of that whole three-dimensional, four-dimensional. Really want to get pedantic about it. Four-dimensional like exercising of space. And I think that's interesting. And one of the things that I always find really interesting is that KDF doesn't explicitly talk about these things, but it definitely, you can start inferring it from the actions and the language that they're using in the manuscripts. Next, we're going to talk about Abstand und Raum. Loosely translate to space. But it's more like what we're talking about here is really the distance between you, your opponent, and yourself. Again, this is materials that we're kind of drawing more technically from later materials. There are some German longsword materials from the 16th century that talk about these distances. But I really mostly pulled this from silver because Corey's silver obsession then became my material to learn. So we primarily talk about there being four distances, but there's a bonus one, and you'll find out what that is shortly. And then also it relates to modus because all these things are intertwined. It's how is the distance and the movements kind of related between you and your opponent. So again, here we go. So space in itself, your ability to move, left versus right, high versus low, in versus out. It's kind of like anyone's ever seen like Star Trek II: The Wrath of Khan. Like Khan's big downfall is he can't learn they don't know how to use spaceships to fight three-dimensionally, and that kind of tends to be one of the major problems with fencers too. A lot of people try to think of it in the very ways of very, very classical fencing, in which I have this line and I can move like this and that's it. And then it's just kind of these two forces. It's also something that just naturally happens, and you see this a lot. Like when you first start out, you just tend to like move towards your opponent and then hope you do the right thing, or you're moving toward, or your opponent, boom, collision, and then everyone dies because everyone gets hit. But these are all the considerations, and we have to learn through our training to utilize all of them, all of the movement available to us. The distances themselves are out, first, in, and close. Out of distance is the safest place to be because no fencer can reach the other, no matter what you do, minus creating some type of projectile weapon, which goes beyond the scope of this conversation. No fencer can reach the other person. Everyone's in the green zone. First distance is when a fencer can reach the other with a step. Now, that might mean a thrust, that might mean a cut, but there is some way that once you reach to a certain distance, you'll see, although there's actually an illustration coming up soon, but that means that if Dina and I are fencing and Dina can reach me. There'll usually be a point where, especially taller fencers, can reach the other fencer first, but it still requires one person to move. And then there's the in distance. And this I kind of broke into two, so there's a bonus in the in distance. In distance is when one fencer can reach the other without a step, which, given all things that most humans are asymmetrical in size, most conflicts in fencing are asymmetrical. Usually one fencer can reach the other before the other one can reach them without a step, right? Now, within that in distance, there's also a red zone, right? Which means both fencers can strike each other, and that's usually a very gnarly place to be. And then there's close range, which is grappling. A fencer can reach the other and wrestle them. So that means if, like, Lacey and I are moving towards each other, and she sees an opening and can grab my arm, all of a sudden, regardless of what, now I can hit Lacey with my sword. Now we're wrestling, right? So I've made some illustrations with our good old PowerPoint pictures, just to kind of illustrate. Now, I got this idea from video games, which I don't play a lot of, but or at least anymore, or since Galaga. But the idea is, like, these circles represent the range of attack of a character, right? Of one of these two fencing characters. So out of distance, when no fencer can reach the other. Now, I've shifted it a little bit here so you can kind of see that now that we've moved into first distance, you can see that this fencer on the left, the red fencer here, has to take a step in order to really reach the opponent. That doesn't necessarily mean that the other fencer can reach them, but it could. Now we're going to move from first distance into in distance. Now our red fencer has now stepped, and they can now reach the blue fencer with simply by cutting down from this Lugenslan kind of position. Now we're in the danger zone, because both fencers are now close enough that they can strike each other. They're not necessarily, someone hesitated striking, and the other neither fencer in this case. This typically happens when. And now this normally happens when you have two fencers that are maybe a little shy or skittish on the approach or the attack. And what ends up happening is you simply kind of sit there and do the Hema dance, waiting for one person to act. Or this happens. The wrestling starts. Because that means that if you're that close, you're probably edging closer and closer anyway. So those are your distances, and you manage your distance through your use of motus. All right, so let's talk about time. Now, time can mean a lot of things. But in the type of time I'm talking about is initiative time, and an attempt at labeling time and actions. I guess is kind of how I'm trying to define this. Especially, and you see them kind of going at great lengths in the Zettel to explain these things, simply because part of the way arguments were made, thus the Zettel being a classical argument, is an attempt to kind of break down and explain how they are defining time as kind of a series of actions. Not necessarily something very common at the time. I mean, it's not unheard of, but to someone who's maybe less worldly in the ways of science, I use that word loosely in the terms of the period, but they'd have to explain time. Now, time has been in Udalev is explained in this four different ways. There's the vor, the knock. Hold on, I have to plug my laptop in because it's getting the red battery of death here. So we have the vor, the knock, the indes, and then knock and vor. Now, the reason they're kind of broken down this way instead of just the classical three vor, knock, indes is I think there's an attempt to explain the actions themselves, which kind of will feed into the next part. As you can see, all these things are kind of flowing together in their relationship. The vor means before, nach after, indes meanwhile or during, and then nach und vor, which is the act upon you act after, then respond before they do X, Y, Z. And I think part of this is because this is all going to be kind of used to describe how you should be fencing, not necessarily chronology. So we all are familiar with vor, seize the vor or something. Means if you are given an opportunity to strike the person before they're able to do anything, you should take it. Because that will end the fight faster if you do such, which is great. The knock means your opponent does something, and then you do something after. And this kind of overlaps with the next part, but I'll get more to that. But means you're allowing your opponent to act first, right? Indes means you're both your opponent is doing something and you're responding immediately to that action, right? The implication is that knock means you're allowing them to complete an action, while indes means you are being responsive to action, responsive to action. Like an Absetzen. Yes, you are acting in the knock to say like an Oberhau coming in, but you are winding against it before that action is able to complete, right? Because if they completed that Oberhau, it would be in your skull or in the tip in your face. The Nach und vor is really about I think Udalev's way of kind of really attempting to describe the knock in such that again, your opponent has fully made an action, and you are then taking advantage of that indes moment, that kind of error. You're taking advantage of that action instead of say like Nachreisen, where they take a big swing and they go too far, and then you boop go in. Udalev describes that as a Nach und vor. So, all right. So now for the big question: when to attack, and you'll see how all of this kind of comes into place. So when to attack, ansetzen, which of course is the attacking first, acting in the vor, making sure that you take advantage of a distraction or hesitation. And ansetzen again is something like a laming technique as well. It could be a laming technique as well. But again, you're taking advantage of that time that your opponent has given you to, and then you use motus to then ansetzen. Absetzen, the counter-attacking techniques, which is like acting in the indes. It's the best way I can, is kind of the way I look at it. I'm also kind of overlapping some of this stuff with silver, so I know it's a little controversial of an interpretation. But Absetzen is reacting, but still aggressively. They begin an action that you must respond just as those actions began. So it's kind of like if they begin that Oberhau, you have to then act before they complete that Oberhau, or even before they get fully in. But it's like, again, that responsiveness. Then we have Nachreisen, which is acting in the knock, acting after they've done something, and say again the big Oberhau, or they overthrust and they take a deep lunging thrust, and you can see that they'll finish that thrust, but you can move aside and then just bop them on the head and everything's over. So you wait until they've completed their action, then act. Now that's not saying you sit there and watch it like it's the Matrix where everything's moving in slow motion, but it's still the idea that they are. It does rely a little bit on committing, but it also a knock action is also parrying, right? Say if they cut, if they take a strike at your head and you versetzen, set it aside. That's a knock action, right? Because now they've struck and you've ended their action by parrying, and then you have to act indes or in the knock, right? So the important one that happened is not at all. One of the things that rarely, depending on how you look at these things, from a martial concept, one of the best things you can do is not get in the fight. George Silver's entire introduction is like 3 pages of asking people not to fight. and it's something that is rarely talked about in the Zettles, but it is something that is, I think, martially sound. Is the idea that it is okay not to engage in a fight, and de-escalation should always be the first thing you try to do. That's not necessarily always the conditions you're going to be doing HEMA in. Probably never the conditions you're going to be doing HEMA in, given that it usually ends up being sparring or some type of competitive sport element. Yeah, I said HEMA is a sport element of you're not going to be running away out of a ring. Or are you? I don't know. I mean, I've almost conceded fights because my opponent was so much larger than me. This was actually advice given to me by my teacher. Like, if you are fighting someone who you know is reckless and huge, like is being reckless and overpowering, be they huge or not, it is okay to just say, I am not willing to engage in this exchange. Because either we've been fencing and you're being a bully, and I've told, and you're not responding to my feedback of tone it down, or you're in a tournament and you're just someone, you've either watched them all day and or are engaging them in the moment and they're acting like a bully, a boofle, and it's okay to tell the judges no, or if they give you shit, concede, and that's okay too. I would rather see students live to fight another day without a concussion than dealing with someone who's a jerk. Yep, it's okay to run away and live another day. So yeah, that's kind of generally, again, when do we want to attack? First, responding, or after, or not at all. And a bonus, because I don't think this was actually in the PDF that I sent out. So it might have been, so otherwise it's not that big of a surprise. One of the most important things you can have in fencing, Kampfgeists. Okay? What that means, it's a fighting spirit. It's something you can bring to both your sparring matches and also your Kampfgeist, Effektgeist. I think they both kind of would translate, but Kampfgeist is probably, it's more linguistically correct. But it means about being mindful and engaged in the moment of practice. And that moment can be sparring. That moment can be a tournament. That moment can be training by yourself. It can be training with a partner. But the idea that when you are practicing, you know where you are thinking about all those fundamental elements. Where are my feet placed? Is my back straight? Are my legs bent correctly? Am I doing a proper grip? When I'm cutting, when I'm engaging in the basics of the drill that I'm doing, am I exercising those basics correctly? Am I doing the drill correctly? It's a lot to have all going on in your brain all at once. But that's why we begin at a very, very basic level, and especially even when we do drills as a mixed group of varied skilled individuals, we always start at the base level, and then we move up, and then there's always going to be a point where certain students are going to be able to practice more advanced versions of the drills than others, which is fine. Everyone is at a different place in their kind of martial arts journey, and it's not a competition in that way, or it should never be a competition, and it's definitely not a race, because you only win when you're dead, and did you really win? Anyway, it's and part of that as well, and it's always kind of a fine balance, is treating every exchange like this is your last exchange. If you treat every action you make like it's going to be the last thing you get to do, because frankly we never know if that's the case or not, and that kind of involves the next part, which is like desiring to push yourself further. Just treating every action and everything you say and do in your Effektschule with respect, and but also giving everything your all. Like knowing, and it's also you have a desire to push yourself further, but it's also knowing your limits is an important part of that, and knowing when you are comfortable and safe to push those limits, and then also helping others feel comfortable to do those same things. One of the things that is really, really difficult in any school is to promote the idea that failure is cool. Failure is fine. None of us want to fail or not do something correctly, but doing something incorrectly can provide feedback on how we can do it correctly and corrections moving forward. And it can be very, very frustrating when you have like an all-star student who comes in and just does everything perfectly. Because if you're training there and you're like, oh, I can't get the crump how to be right, but blah 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 blah, that can be frustrating. But again, that's not your journey; it's someone else's trip. And also, and failure can be a powerful tool for learning because it also prepares us for future failure. I only say this because I'm one of those students that takes a little while longer to learn stuff sometimes, and it can be endlessly frustrating. I don't have a good relationship with my body. My mind and my body do not have a good relationship. I'm not. Before I did HEMA, I was not an athlete in any way or form. And in fact, until I was in my 20s, I was in horrible, horrible shape. And so developing this kind of brain-body connection has been like really difficult during HEMA. And so to learn certain very simple things like, okay, how to do Oberhau correctly, it took me a really, really long time. And I still don't do it correctly every time, you know. Yeah. So yeah, anyway, long story short, I should have added like under this, like learning to use failure as a tool, and not to think of failure as a bad word. And then also the last one is knowing how and when to be a good training partner, a good fencing opponent. That's about etiquette, like learning and knowing the etiquette of your Fechtschule and your community, and supporting your community both inside the school and outside the school, and finding ways that you can, make sure that you are a good representative for yourself and your school. Yeah. Thank you for coming to my TED Talk. But yeah. So really, that's all I really have in terms of this presentation. So if folks, does anyone have any questions, comments, or anything they want to talk about before we call it an evening? I can't see everyone's windows, so if you want to say something, please pop a message in the chat. Why can't I see all the windows? All right. But yeah, so so if no one has any comments, questions, or concerns, we'll move on to. I guess we'll just kind of close out. But yeah, so movie night's still gonna happen, starting around 8:30. I'll think of a movie between here and there. It'll be fun. Maybe I'll finally air Hellraiser. Keep that Thanksgiving spirit alive. But yeah. So yeah, I'll post this class, and also the PDF should be available in the Discord, and I'll post the PDF of this class. I'll post PDF on the longestsemester.com. And class tomorrow will be we're probably nearing the last outdoor class we're going to be doing this year, only because keeping an eye on two different things, which the weather, the more practical of the two things. It's starting to get cold, and even though we can all bundle up, if you can dodge a snowball, you can dodge a messer. I know Josh doesn't agree with me, but yeah, we could bundle up and go outside. But my bigger concern is the COVID-19 pandemic is continuing, and in New York City the numbers are increasing. And I am tomorrow. You can do steel, so steel for both. Feel free to bring your Effekterspiels or Fetterspielt. But yeah, long story short, the numbers are getting worse in New York City, and I'm beginning. We're at over the 3% mark now. I guess it depends on whose numbers you're using. We're going to be following state and federal guidelines, but if we end up being a 4% orange zone, et cetera, I'm shutting classes, or at least I will not be leading classes, as I don't feel comfortable hosting that. So this weekend, so I'll keep everyone updated, and yeah, thank you all so much for coming. And for those of you who will be around tomorrow, I look forward to seeing you all tomorrow. If you get a chance, I'm working for tips, so please hit up ko-fi.com/Peter J. Haas. If you can, it really helps support kind of keeping these classes going. If not, that's okay. Pandemic are crazy time, and you're under no obligation. So thank you all for coming to class, and I'll see a bunch of you tomorrow. Oh, and that movie night. All right. Bye.
Thanks, Peter.